She's too old. I want a younger woman. Daniel said it calmly, as if he were discussing a lease or replacing a cracked window. His voice carried across the courtroom, past our attorneys, and the 7 people seated behind us. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I was 58 years old. Daniel was 61. We had been married for 27 years. Judge Eleanor Shaw looked at him, then at me. Her expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "who owns the company you're asking this court to divide?" For the first time that morning, Daniel hesitated. The courtroom clock above the judge's bench had stopped at 10:14. I noticed it because I had been watching the second hand, waiting for it to move. It never did. 3 hours earlier, I had placed 3 sealed folders in Marion Holt's hands outside the courthouse. Marion had been my attorney and my friend, long enough to know that I did not bring documents unless I had read them twice. "Are you certain?" she had asked. "Yes," I said. I had not told her everything. Not yet. Daniel sat beside his attorney in a navy suit I had chosen for him 6 years before. He looked polished, confident, almost relieved. He believed the court would hear a simple story: an aging wife, a successful husband, and a company that belonged to him. Judge Shaw turned another page. Daniel smiled at her, certain the question about ownership was merely procedural. That was when I understood he had never once considered the possibility that I owned the room he was standing in. For most of our marriage, Daniel was the person clients remembered, and I was the person who made sure their checks cleared. At Mercer Reed Architecture, he presented ideas in glass conference rooms while I tracked the 39 monthly vendor accounts, approved payroll, and called creditors when a project ran late. He called it administration. I called it keeping the lights on. In 2008, the firm nearly failed. We had more than $184,000 in debt, and Daniel was away at design conferences while I sat at our kitchen table with a calculator, 3 bank statements, and a list of employees whose paychecks were due Friday. I worked until 11:42 p.m. most nights. I never told anyone how frightened I was. By the time Daniel came home, I had negotiated enough time to keep the firm open. He kissed my forehead, thanked me, and went back to talking about his next project. Years later, his attention changed. He started wearing cologne to the office and turning his phone face down during dinner. Then he began saying I was tired, that I had become difficult, that the firm needed a different kind of energy. The first hotel receipt appeared in October. It listed a room, 2 towns away, paid with the company card. I read it twice, wrote the date in the margin, and placed it inside the blue accordion folder beneath the basement stairs. I did not confront him. Not because I was unaware, but because I had learned that facts became more useful when they were allowed to accumulate. The receipt was for a hotel 2 towns away, but the name on the reservation was not Daniel's. Daniel told me he wanted a divorce on a Tuesday morning, while I was sorting invoices at the dining room table. He did not raise his voice. He placed his coffee beside my ledger and said he needed a different kind of life. Then he used words that sounded practiced. I was slowing down. I was no longer presentable. The firm needed someone younger. I looked at the invoice in front of me. It was for replacement windows at the office, dated 3 days earlier. "Who is someone younger?" I asked. Daniel stared at the table. I already knew about Lila Voss, the 34-year-old marketing consultant who had begun appearing at the firm twice a week. What I did not know was that she had toured the house Daniel once promised would be our retirement home. Nora Bell mentioned it carefully, as if the information might bruise me. Grant did not handle the news carefully. He confronted his father that evening in the kitchen. Daniel called me emotionally outdated and said the business needed new energy. Grant looked at him for several seconds before leaving without answering. The next morning, I met Marion Holt at her office. I brought the blue accordion folder from beneath the basement stairs and placed it on her desk. She rested one hand on the cover. "Should I open it?" "Not yet," I said. "Wait for the financial disclosures." Marion studied my face, then nodded. That afternoon, Daniel sent me a message saying his attorney would contact me about dividing the company. He wrote that he had built it alone. Marion read the first page, looked up at me, and asked why Daniel had been signing documents he no longer had the authority to sign. Marion opened the blue accordion folder the next morning. Inside was a 2008 operating agreement, 2 signed board resolutions, and copies of the bank transfers I had made during the firm's debt crisis. The agreement stated that I owned 62% of Mercer Reed Architecture, after covering $184,000 in company obligations and guaranteeing 6 months of payroll. Daniel had signed it. Marian read the final page twice. He knew. Yes, I said. Daniel had known for 18 years. He had simply assumed I would never enforce it. At the time, I had wanted to protect our family, our employees, and the company we had built together. I had not imagined that one day he would use my silence as evidence that I had contributed nothing. Nora Bell confirmed the history when Marian called her. Nora had been the firm's senior office manager since 2008. She remembered me negotiating with creditors while Daniel attended a design conference in Chicago. She remembered the payroll spreadsheet, the 6-month guarantee, and the night I stayed until 1:17 a.m. to keep 42 employees from missing their checks. I decided not to confront Daniel privately. The agreement could speak in court. So could the bank records. 2 days later, Thomas Reed sent over the preliminary accounting report. One line was highlighted in yellow. It showed $96,400 transferred from the company to an account connected to Lila Voss. I had expected the agreement to protect me from being erased. I had not expected it to explain why Daniel was suddenly so desperate to leave. Daniel described me as uninvolved in the company. He said I had never attended a client meeting, never negotiated a contract, and had only handled minor household bookkeeping. He said it while 14 exhibits sat in a folder on the table between us. Marian submitted the operating agreement first. Then came the bank records, showing my $184,000 contribution, followed by the board minutes Daniel had signed in 2008. The documents were plain, almost dull. That was their strength. Nora Bell testified next. She explained that I had approved payroll, reviewed vendor contracts, and managed the firm's accounts for 18 years. She did not exaggerate. She simply answered each question. How many payroll cycles did Mrs. Mercer oversee? Marian asked. Everyone I remember, Nora said. At least 2,200. Daniel shifted in his chair. Judge Eleanor Shaw examined the financial disclosure Daniel had submitted. On it, he had listed himself as the company's sole owner. Beside the ownership percentage, he had written 100%. Mr. Mercer, she said, why did you list yourself as sole owner when these documents show a controlling interest held by your wife? Daniel glanced toward his attorney, then toward Thomas Reed, his accountant. No one spoke for him. He said the agreement had been informal. Judge Shaw turned to the signed page. Your signature is here. Daniel said he had not understood what he was signing. Marian placed another document before the judge, a board resolution from the same year confirming my 62% interest. Daniel's signature appeared at the bottom again. The courtroom stayed quiet. Not dramatically, just long enough for the truth to become uncomfortable. Daniel looked at Thomas Reed, his own accountant, as if loyalty could alter a number already printed in black ink. Thomas Reed explained the transfers in a voice so quiet that everyone in the courtroom leaned forward. The $96,400 had not been used for advertising, as Daniel claimed. It had been divided into 4 payments and sent to an account connected to Lila Voss. Daniel had labeled the transfers consulting expenses, then promised Lila a partnership interest in Mercer Reed Architecture. The problem was that he did not own enough of the firm to make that promise. Marian submitted 23 messages between Daniel and Lila. In one, he wrote that I had no claim on the company and would walk away quietly once the divorce was finished. In another, he told her the firm would soon belong to both of them. Lila sat behind Daniel, reading the messages on the attorney's monitor. Her face remained still, but she stopped looking at him. Grant was called next. He spoke carefully, without anger. Daniel had told him the business was his alone. He had also called me emotionally outdated and said the firm needed someone younger. Judge Shaw asked me whether I wanted to respond. I looked at the exhibits arranged across the table. I want the records to be accurate, I said. I'm not asking the court to punish anyone. Daniel shifted in his chair. When Thomas finished, Judge Shaw folded her hands over the file. Mr. Mercer, she said, you did not ask this court to divide your company. You asked it to divide someone else's. Judge Shaw issued her ruling on a Thursday morning. I remained still while she confirmed what the documents had already shown. I retained 2% of Mercer Reed Architecture, and Daniel had 30 days to account for every dollar transferred from the company without proper authorization. The house went to Daniel, along with the debt attached to it. I kept my share of the firm, my savings, and the small apartment Marion had helped me find near the river. It had 2 narrow windows and a kitchen barely large enough for one person, which suited me perfectly. Nothing about the ruling was theatrical. Judge Shaw did not scold Daniel or raise her voice. She simply corrected the record. The company was not his alone. I had not been financially dependent. My age was not evidence of diminished value. Lila ended their relationship 2 weeks later, after Thomas Reed confirmed that Daniel had promised her a partnership interest he did not own. Daniel remained free to leave the marriage. He was not free to rewrite the 27 years that had made his success possible. Outside the courthouse, Grant stood beside Marion and Nora. No one congratulated me. They understood that this was not a victory parade. It was an accounting. Daniel had wanted the court to decide whether I was still worth choosing. The judge decided something narrower and far more useful: what was actually mine.